Thank you, Jamie. And hello, everybody. And it's very lovely to be with you all today. And I have plenty of tea to power me through. So we're going to be okay today. So thank you for coming along today and for being my second batch ever of test subjects. My name is Ceri, and if I share my screen, you will see, hopefully, that, here we have all of the social medias. Do feel free to tag me on whatever you use throughout, but don't feel obliged. Or you can see there, you can visit me on my pretty awful wireframe of a website. Go take a look at that and reassure yourself that yours isn't that bad. I am in the process of writing a new book, a book. I haven't written any yet, and I have a new podcast. So as we're going through, any social media bumps would be greatly appreciated, but don't feel obliged. Similarly, if you would like to turn your camera on, you are very welcome to do so. I really appreciate the visual feedback, but don't feel obliged. Again, this is a safe space, and if you want to simply watch, you are very welcome to do that. There's no reason for you to switch on if you're not comfortable to. Okay, so it tells me to drink. There you go. I've got my notes here, and it says drink water. Also, if you have questions as we go through, do please put them in the chat, and whatever we have time to answer at the end, I will answer those at the end. And if we don't have time to answer any, then you can ask me on LinkedIn or on the chat page of the meetup. That's fine too. Okay, so I began, as so many of us do then, with Scrum. So sprints, backlogs, retrospectives, sort of a heady whirl of cadence. And on the way through that, I found the manifesto. I absorbed it, I lived it, I breathed it. And as I worked, I also read. I began with Jeff Sutherland and David Marquette, and then Lisa Adkins, Patrick Lencioni, Heidi Grant Halverson. Soon, Atal Gawande, Dan Kahneman, Frederick Laloux, Lisa Feldman Barrett. Now, the more that I read, the more detached I became from the process of Scrum, and the more I dove into the people side. Because the three pillars, right? Inspection, adaptation, transparency, they're great. They're useful. I'd say they're pretty essential. But I found that it was the individuals that I was working with and more how well designed their interactions were that made the real difference to how successful we were. And that was much more so than the processes and the tools that we found ourselves using. Because I suppose we can say without the right people having the right conversations at the right time, our processes and tools mean nothing. So that's to say, you can have the best processes and tools in the world, but without good people working well together whilst using those processes and tools, you're still screwed. So, working product, customer collaboration, responding to change, all of them, every single one, hinge on your individuals and their interactions. And that's where I come in. I'm Ceri, I'm an Agile behavioural coach, and I'm here today because I want you and I want your teams to interact with each other more effectively. And I'm going to do that by breaking down this idea of individuals and interactions. And we'll be looking at 4 things that we can do differently, 4 new elements of the manifesto, or Mini-festo, if you will. I'll admit the title could use some work. Any suggestions are very welcome. Anyway, the manifesto, Mini-festo, whatever we call it, I'm here to show you how we should come to value impact over intent, curiosity over authority, us, we, our over I, me, my, and finally purpose over direction. That is, whilst we value the items on the right, to be agile, to truly absorb it into our own ways of being, we must value the items on the left more. Now, This is an experiment, as I say, a brand new talk. Some of the slides might be a bit rubbish, and I might not explain some parts that well. You might think, oh, I wish we could do a short exercise to explain that bit, or I wish we had a link or a model or whatever. So I'd be extremely grateful if you would give me your feedback throughout. You will see details for Menti polls as we go through. Hopefully you're familiar with those, but you can go to menti.com and sign in with a number. And I would love you to tell me your thoughts for each section, what you liked, what you didn't, what you'd like more of, what was missing as we go through. And I'll prompt you, don't worry. Thank you. So as we go through, I will be answering 4 key questions. What do we mean when we say this? Why is it important? What's the benefit for us? Why do we value the item on the left more? And what does this look like in the real world? How do we practice it? And how do we know that we're doing it well? Okay, so let's jump right in then. Let's begin with our impact. And if you wouldn't mind going to menti.com and putting in the code shown on your screen here, that code is 70966545, and adding your thoughts as we go through, that would be awesome. Thank you. So, impact over intent. And I'm starting here because I think this is one of the most fundamental errors that we make. And so let's look at this with 4 questions, our 4 questions, beginning with what we mean by impact. So when I'm talking about impact, we need to be thinking about the effect that we have. What effect am I having on you, the listener, as I'm speaking to you, or in a dialogue? What effect am I having on you, the other person in that dialogue, as I'm saying what I'm saying? How is the other person experiencing that interaction with us? And how much dedicated time have we spent thinking about that? So it comes down to what we say and how we say it, and how the other person feels as we're saying it and interprets us as we go through. And when we're thinking about our impact, our job really in the conversation is, as we're speaking, to notice the impact that we're having. So why look at this? What do we get? Well, Dr. Dan Siegel has a fantastic model of your brain, which is really helpful when we're thinking about things like this. And it's called the brain in the hand model. And you can do it yourself. You can see it yourself by, you can represent your brain by crossing your thumb across your palm like this, and then closing your fingers over the top. So this is us in a calm state. So you've got down here, you've got your brain stem. This is the part of your brain that's responsible for your breathing, your digestion, your heart rate, and underneath here you've got your palm. So this is the bit of your brain that represents, this bit of your hand represents your limbic system. So that's the bit of your brain responsible for your emotions, your motivation, your fight or flight or freeze response, which is done using hormones, controlled by hormones. So we've also got you've got under here your amygdala, and this is the part of your brain that responds to stress, to danger, and it tracks social connections. So are those connections serving us to keep us safe, or are those connections, is this situation putting us at potential risk? And then the fingers up here at the top, or closed down the bottom, that represents your cortex, so the outer part of your brain, the bumpy bit that you see in any drawing of the brain. And the 2 fingers in the middle here, that's your prefrontal cortex. So that's the bit of your brain that's responsible for your executive function, your rational thought, your decision making, your problem solving, those sorts of things. Okay, so when we are able to focus on impact rather than our intent, what we do is we create a more calm state in the other person. So Dan Siegel calls this your calm state, and then when we get triggered for whatever reason, perhaps because we're thinking about our intent rather than our impact, what we do is Dan Siegel calls this flipping your lid. So what happens here is that your rational part of your brain is no longer connected to the bits that control your physical responses, and this is why you get the urge to run away away or escape. This is why we get nervous and hate going and talking on the stage, because you're not in this calm, rational state of mind where your prefrontal cortex has access to the rest of your functions. You are in this flipped state of mind. So this part of your brain is no longer getting as much blood as the rest of it, and so your functions here are significantly reduced. When we focus on our impact rather than our intent, when we notice how the other person that we're speaking to is responding as we're talking to them, we help them to stay in this calm state, which means that they can more rationally process what we're saying to them. And that then in turn gives us the chance to also stay in this calmer brain state, because we are very good at responding on a subconscious level to what we see in the people around us. If we pick up on a subconscious level that the other person is in this flipped state, well, your amygdala will pick that up, track that, and tells you that you're potentially at threat, because it reacts in a millisecond to try and keep you safe. You then respond with that flipped lid state. So you also no longer have access to your rational thought, your decision making, your problem solving, all of those crucial executive functions that we need to keep a hold of to be working effectively. Okay, so what we then get when we are able to stay in that calm state, we get the ability to be more honest with each other, and we can be honest in a way that doesn't spark terror, that doesn't trigger fragility, either in the other person or in ourselves, which can happen if we're not paying attention to these things. We also get more candor with care. We get more kindness, more compassion. And again, these things are crucial as we're going through our daily tasks, our daily work, our daily interactions. If we want to have the really good conversations, the ones where we really get to the nub of the problem, where we really knuckle down on the ideal solution, where we work out what it is that we all need to be doing differently without taking that information personally, we need to keep people in this calm state of mind and stay in that state of mind ourselves. So what we're able to do then is to begin to honour each other's vulnerabilities rather than exploit them. So this ties in then to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? One of the core needs at the very bottom is the need for physiological safety. So when you're in this state, your amygdala has tracked that you are no longer physiological safe. And so when we are able to keep people in this state, when we're able to focus on the impact that we're having and notice the impact that we're having and course correct as we're going through the conversation, we end up with people far more willing to do the work because they have the mental capacity to care. Okay, so why not intent? Well, good intent is necessary too, right? We need morals, we need ethics in order to do good work, but we can all have good intentions and have them lead to some pretty terrible consequences. My website is just one example. The trouble is, it all goes wrong when we forget that there's another human on the receiving end, especially when we are in that flipped lid state, especially when we ourselves are upset. We don't always know the other person's story. We don't know their background, their environment, what their home life is like. We don't know what their day has been like. But when we focus on the impact that we're having on them as we're speaking to them, and especially when they are able to also focus on the impact that they're having on us when they're speaking to us, then we can be mutually respectful of each other's needs in that moment. And we can leave the other person, we can leave each other feeling supported instead of feeling defensive. Now, it's important to note that our subconscious intent, our feelings, these things come out in our choices, and particularly in our word choices, in our choice of tone, our facial expressions when we're not noticing them. And so the language and the visual centers of your brain are intrinsically linked. And what that means is that you end up saying something along the lines of what you visualize, and you end up visualizing what you say. So that means that we build a picture, or you build a picture of what you mean as you're saying it. And you never really know how the sentence is going to end until you get to the end of it. So that means that even if we want a good outcome from that interaction, if we subconsciously see the other person as awful, if we forget to see them as a thinking, feeling, flawed human being, that will come out in our word choices, in our tone, in our body language. And this is one of the subconscious processes that goes on and actually leads to a lot of the biases that we see that are causing so many issues in our society at the moment. Now, the point that I'm making then, amongst all of this, is that intent doesn't build trust. It's impact that does that. Okay, so how? What does it look like in the real world? Well, really useful model for practicing this is that of the radical candor model from Kim Scott, and this is where we focus on using candor and care. Now, candor and care are crucial together. We can be honest, but if we are not incorporating that element of caring about the other person as we're giving them our feedback or telling them what we think, if we forget that they're a thinking, feeling human being, we miss out on keeping them in that calm state. And it means that they're less likely to be hearing what we're saying to them. They're less likely to process it. They're certainly less likely to be able to come up with solutions and ideas to whatever we're suggesting to them as a result. They're much more likely to get defensive when we end up using that candor without care. We can't just use candor, we must incorporate care as well. Now, it also looks like using simple, unambiguous language. So making word choices that we know appeal and can be understood by everybody in the room, especially when we're working with overseas teams. Perhaps English might not be their first language. When we're respectful of their needs, so when we are using language that can be as easily translated as possible. And if you speak some other languages, then you'll have some familiarity with where there might be crossover words. That's the kind of spectrum that we can focus our language on specifically with those groups. Not to treat them like they're idiots, not at all, but simply to make sure that we are operating from a base level of understanding from the outset and expanding and building on that as we go through. So it also, tied to this, means using less jargon, using fewer acronyms. Now, the problem with using jargon is that we quite unintentionally usually, we use it to exclude and also to elevate ourselves. We do it to show how smart we are, how very important we are. I know all the words. The trouble is, right, that the impact of this is that we end up causing fear in the other person because they don't know what all of these words mean. And especially if they've been there for a couple of months, then it becomes terrifying to have to ask, well, what does that acronym mean? People feel like they ought to know. So really, we are shaming people in settings where we need to be able to access them in this state. And if you are feeling shame, you're in defense, you are triggered, you are in this flip lid state once again. Not very productive. Okay. So, if you wouldn't mind going to menticut.com, if you have not already done so, the number at the bottom of your screen, 70966545, I would hugely appreciate some feedback on how that landed with you, anything that stood out, anything that you felt was missing or didn't work. Thank you very much in advance. Okay, so moving on. Curiosity over authority. Now, we assume that because we think something, that makes it right. Because when you think a thought, it automatically feels like it's true. You don't sit there picking up every thought that you think and going, are you sure? Is that absolutely the case? That's a chair over there. Well, are you sure that's a chair? Have you checked? Right, so we assume that what we're thinking is correct. And we also often think that we know the answer. Our lived experience gives us an idea in the moment and we take that as truth. And that then means we need to tell others. We need to give that information to other people. Well, maybe so, but maybe not. So what do we mean by curiosity? We mean first asking, not telling. So in the moment, this means not giving our opinion, not giving our thoughts on what the problem is or on what the solution is, but actually taking a moment to hear the opinions of the people in the room. And it also looks like not just waiting for our turn to talk, but actually listening to what the other person is saying and using that as the basis to build our response on, not simply waiting for our turn to voice the solution to the problem. And this is one of the ways that we end up contributing contributing to our teamwork, right? So it also means assuming that you don't already know the answer. One of the things we're very good at doing, as I say, is assuming that our lived experience gives us the exact answer needed for this particular solution, for this particular problem. The trouble is that solution may have worked in that context, it may have worked in that time frame, it may have worked with those people, in that environment, in that market. We don't have any guarantees. There's nothing ironclad to say that what worked for us in the past is what's going to work here and now. So what we can do is offer ideas, potentials, options, but we shouldn't be phrasing things as something that we already know. We should take that curious approach of, well, this could work, but it might not. What would happen if we tried it? Well, that could work, but it might not. What would happen if we tried it? What we don't want to end up doing is getting caught on Dunning-Kruger's Mount Stupid, right? This is where we have a very high self-perception of our competence, but we don't have yet enough lived experience to have real competence. And of course, as I've just said, sometimes we have plenty of experience, but that doesn't mean that we have competence in this particular situation with these people in this environment with this product, etc., etc., etc. Now, curiosity allows us to sidestep that because we are continuously taking this learning approach where we're getting information from the other people, getting options, finding out things that we could try, rather than assuming that everything that is said is now solid fact. So what do we get out of all of this? Well, I've already explained some of it, but out of this, we are able to produce that highly sought over psychological safety. What we do when we adopt curiosity rather than authority, especially as people in a position of authority potentially within our teams, we give people the ability to speak up, to voice an opinion, which is absolutely crucial because there's nothing to say that those opinions aren't the thing that's going to help us get through whatever problem or issue we're currently facing. It means we also give people the ability to make mistakes and to get it wrong. When we have curiosity, we're taking more of a learning approach. So that means that it's much safer. We're accepting that people might make mistakes and get it as we go. Okay. Broken my slides. Okay, so we can also, as we begin to incorporate this approach of being curious ourselves, we begin modelling this behaviour to the people around us. So when we model for people who don't already have an idea of what that looks like, you can read something in a book, you can read it in a blog article or hear it on a podcast, but until you know what that looks like in the real world, it's really hard to put that in practice. Not impossible, of course, but it's much harder. So by modelling these things yourself, you make it easier for the people in your teams, the people around you, to begin to exhibit some of these and practice some of these traits themselves. It means that everyone can follow you as the curious leader, and by proxy you also make it safe, make it acceptable, make it the norm to be curious. We then end up with increased transparency. So people are much more willing to share. They are much more willing to share crucial information instead of hiding it from each other. So we reduce the number of silos and improve that level of communication between people. So fewer silos and more communication leads to a far more resilient organisation. Why? Well, because we're normalising sharing information. We're normalising asking questions in order to get to that information. And you as the leader or the servant leader of the team beginning that process, making that process okay and doing it as a model for others to follow, you begin to normalize that. Sow those ideas, those seeds of ideas. So this then leads to more learning, more growth for everyone, right? And this ties into Carol Dweck's, what Carol Dweck talks about as the growth mindset. She has a fantastic, I think the best video where she explains about the growth mindset is the talk that she did for Google. It's not a very short video, not as short as some of the other ones out there, but I think it's one of the best ways of explaining growth mindset. But so growth mindset is... or part of growth mindset is when we're able to respond in a safe way to these mistakes. We don't take these mistakes as somehow showing that we're a useless individual. Everybody makes mistakes, even experienced professionals in high up positions of authority. Everybody makes mistakes. What's important is how we learn from them. So that curious approach that we can take helps us to adopt more of a learning strategy in response to those mistakes. Now, the added bonus of this is that things like imposter syndrome, where you sit there and you tell yourself how rubbish you are at your job, well, that kind of takes a back seat when you know that you're always learning, because of course I don't know all of the things. That's okay. Hush down, simmer down, imposter syndrome. I'm learning, and that's a continual process. So that makes that much more acceptable. Okay, so why not authority? Well, authority is necessary and it helps people to feel more secure. Certainty helps people to trust their leadership, and that is absolutely crucial, especially when, for example, say you might be going through an international pandemic. But only operating with authority means that we are missing out on crucial information from people whose voices aren't being heard. It means that our experienced and capable professionals, people that we hired for a reason, well, their voices aren't being heard, but they very much deserve to be. Now, we also sometimes see agile practitioners who arrive, and even though there are some things already working within a team, but they're not called agile or they're not called Scrum, they will swoop in and make sea changes, and the team needs to be in that shu state of shu-ha re. But we shouldn't be swooping in to fix what isn't broken. Because we're assuming that we know best and we have all the answers. Now, a really good example, so when we have authority without curiosity, this then leads to having disempowered teams, because after all, why should they care? So authority without curiosity leads to failure. So what happens when we step back from authority? This is David Marquette's book. David Marquette was a naval captain, and he managed to take one of the worst performing US submarines, turn it around and turn it into one of the best. And he did this by taking much more of a curious approach to his leadership. So he arrived on the submarine having studied to be the leader of a completely different submarine, and then they shifted him to this worst performing one instead. He ended up having to ask everyone around him all of the questions because he simply didn't know the answers, and not knowing the answers and not getting them from somebody would simply mean that everybody on board would die. Right? Pretty crucial. So what he did was he made people, instead of telling them what to do, he made them come to him, trusted their capacity as capable professionals, made them come to him and tell him what they intended to do. Now, if that turned out to be something that potentially could sink the ship or kill everybody on board, then he had the capacity to say no. He kept his authority over pressing the big red button. But for everything else, he trusted in the capacity of the capable professionals that were on board that ship and let his curiosity ask them whatever questions were needed to establish the right course of action in the moment. Okay, so what else does it look like? Well, something else that we can do is use things like open questions. That is to say, not using questions that expect a yes or no answer, but rather moving to using questions that leave scope to discuss the answer. So questions that begin with how, what, where, when, who, which, why. So examples of this would be, for example, asking the other person, well, what do you think? Or saying, well, why is that? You could ask people, well, what happens when? What happens when you do that? What happens when you don't do that? You can also ask, what would happen if you didn't go ahead with that? So if they're talking about an issue that they're having, something that isn't working, what would happen if you didn't go to that meeting? And tell me more about that. So these ways of inviting discussion that gives more than just a yes or no response. Now, another thing that we can do is make sure that the leader or the highest paid person or the person with the most authority in the room is the person that speaks last, making sure that they give space. They effectively are canvassing for the opinions of the junior people in the room, the junior members of the team, before they give their own opinions. So let the junior people speak before you tell them what you think. So this also means that you can give space and voice to the quietest person in the room. And if you work with introverts, then of course that can be by post-it note if necessary, or virtual whiteboard, whatever you need to give space, but allowing people to have that opportunity to voice their own thoughts before you give yours. Because the trouble is, when we give our own thoughts first, especially if we're in a position of authority or some sort of revered or leadership position, people want to be seen to be doing a good job, so they don't like to be seen to have a different opinion, maybe something that disagrees. That's inherently risky. Perhaps that might make them look like they're wrong. They don't want to look like an idiot. Whereas if you're willing to hear all of those voices, hear all of those opinions, you're saying that those opinions, those voices are valid. They deserve to be heard. All right. It also, this idea of curiosity over authority, it means not interrupting when people are speaking. So not just jumping in with your thoughts when you think what they're saying is wrong, but giving them time to finish what they're saying. One of the teams that I worked with actually chose on their Zoom meetings, they had two rules that they decided to incorporate. One was adding three, like counting to three whenever anybody stopped talking, so that the other person, the person who was talking, had time to add to their thoughts if needed be. So as I said earlier, we construct a vision, we construct the idea of what we're trying to say as we're saying it. It begins as quite a nebulous idea in our head. We don't have all of the words until we get to the end of our sentence, and sometimes the end of that sentence then triggers another thought, and if you don't give those count of three, then you risk losing that. Now, to make sure that then you didn't just have one person in the room talking all the time, they also had a hand up, so that if they wanted to say something in response to what was being said, then the person speaking knew that they had their count of three. They could then say something if they needed to, but then they needed to hand over the baton to somebody else to give their thoughts to. And so we can also ask ourselves, why am I talking? So any time that you choose to give your opinion, asking yourself, well, am I giving this because I want to be revered, I want people to respect me, I want people to be impressed, or does this genuinely add value to the conversation that we are having as a team? And it's a crucial question to ask yourself, because if you're just talking to try to look good, to protect your position, well, firstly, there isn't perhaps as much psychological safety as there could be in your organisation, but also you're stopping somebody else who might have something really valid, really important to say, something that might really contribute, something useful to solve whatever problem you're trying to move through. Okay, third. So, and oh, I see that I've forgotten to actually go to the next slide. So, oh yeah, no, here we go. So I've done the wrong thing here. I did say I'd mess this up. Ignore that number. Don't type in that number just yet. You need to use, hang on, where is it? You need to use that one. So 70966545. Please, I would love your thoughts on curiosity over authority. If you don't mind going to menti.com and just giving me some feedback on that section. Anything that I didn't explain thoroughly, anything that you'd like more information about, and so on and so forth, or what really worked for you, that's fine too. I like praise too, who doesn't? So yeah, thank you if you wouldn't mind going and putting your thoughts in there. Okay, so moving on, and you will see As we go through this next bit, there is a different Menti number, 72086593, but that will pop up on the screen as we go through, so don't worry about that. And it's a different number because I don't have a pro account and I can only run 2 polls on each number because I'm cheap. But there we go. Menti is still awesome. Thanks, Menti. So, talking next about us, we, our over I, me, my. And the idea here is that really we are better together. And we are less effective when we are on our own. So, what do we mean by this? Excuse me. We mean thinking as a team. We mean acting cohesively, acting with the interests of us as a group in mind, not solely the performance of your resident rock star. So yeah, rock stars are great and all, but if they're not acting in the interests of the team, then actually they can be quite harmful and quite disruptive. Okay, it also means behaving and treating each other, especially that rock star needs to be behaving and treating the people around them, but behaving and treating each other as equally capable professionals, even, or in fact especially the junior members of your team. And this is absolutely crucial that we do treat each other in this equal way if we want to lend value to the examples that I've already given, so the curiosity and the impact. Absolutely crucial. And it also means, when we talk about us, we, our, it means moving together towards the same thing. And as we go through, as we move together towards that same thing, it means uncovering outcomes that work for us both. Not just the outcomes that work for me, not just the outcomes that work for you, but so in the things that work for me and the things that work for you, finding where the overlap is. What are the things that work for the both of us? Those are the things that we want to be taking forwards. That's what we mean. And then why? What do we get? Well, to begin with, much better teamwork. We get a much better outcome when we understand that 1 + 1 equals much more than 2. The sum is significantly greater than its parts. And a really good example of this, really simple example of this, is musical harmony. You sing one note, I sing another, but if we're in tune... not my middle daughter, who, God love her, no, I won't say because this is recorded, but I love you, sweetheart, don't sing. But if you put that note, my note and your note together and we create a glorious harmony, that harmony is far more beautiful than either one of those notes individually on their own. What else? So transparent communication. We get far more willing to share information. We get fewer silos when we are focusing on us, we, our, the outcomes that work for us all. There's less need to squirrel away that information and hide it for your own protection, because actually what benefits the team ends up benefiting you as an individual as well. So that then leads to more shared understanding. And again, that benefits everybody on the team, not just one individual. And that shared understanding is something that we can then grow and enhance as we move forwards. Now this has even more benefits. It means that we have enhanced well-being. We feel a part of the connected whole. And that sense of connection, being a part of something bigger than ourselves, being a part of something important, something that's moving in a generally wonderful direction or a better direction than it was previously, that then has really good effects, really good impacts on our mental health. And Johan Hari, I can pop a link in the comments for his book, but he wrote a book called Lost Connection, which is one of the most superb breakdowns of the value of connection amongst human beings that I've read so far. Okay, so why not I, me, my? Well, it's important to say that, like, you don't want to lose yourself in all of this. Your sense of self is still crucial, still important. And, fit your own gas mask first, right? You have to look after your own well-being ahead of the team's well-being on a day-to-day self-care basis. You can't give up your family life in order to benefit the team. That's not at all what I'm saying. And the other thing is, we also, of course, we want to avoid groupthink. But what we want to step away from, and the idea behind this is we want to step away from yourself, treating yourself as more than, or treating others as less than, because that is detrimental to us all. And that includes things like racial or gender inequalities. It includes sexuality discrimination, and even down to political division. Everybody is entitled to their opinions as long as they're not, actively physically harming other people. But in that team setting, what we want to say is your opinions, who you are, how you show up, that's valid and welcome in this space. But what we want to do is work out where the things are that overlap amongst all of those things, all of those individual factors that make you all beautiful, wonderful, glorious people. What it is amongst that we can take forwards in order to benefit the team, to benefit the department, to benefit the organisation as a whole. Now, if we focus only on I, me, my, we also risk slipping into arrogance and treating people with contempt. And contempt is one of the 4 toxins of communication. So the 4 toxins of communication: stonewalling, defensiveness, contempt, and blame or criticism. And there was, this is one of the most damaging, contempt in particular is one of the most damaging to our relationships. And there was actually a study done on divorce rates, or things that led to divorce, and the study showed that in couples that showed each other contempt or had contemptuous behaviours to each other, so that sort of, for God's sakes, that response to things that your partner is saying to you, those were the relationships that tended to have much higher rates of divorce. And that tracks into teams as well. It's impossible to have a good co-working relationship, to work in a good psychologically safe environment if we are treating each other with contempt. Essentially, it destroys all efforts at cohesion. Okay, so we also, when we only focus on I, me, my, we become we isolate people. We run the risk of othering people, and that's where we treat other people as less than. We treat them as if they're somehow the enemy, and this then risks those blaming behaviours instead of those problem-solving behaviours. The point here being that whatever has gone wrong, we need to find ways forwards, and anything else ultimately is a pointless waste of energy. Okay, so how do we do this? What does it look like in the real world? Well, a really great way is pair programming, or as I recently discovered the joys, pair coaching, which is a fabulous experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone who would like to try it. If you work in an organisation where there are multiple Scrum Masters or multiple Agile coaches, pair coaching is a superb learning experience. So I heard about this on the Agile Uprising podcast, and happened to also quite accidentally put it into practice in my own organisation. So I was in the middle of the backlog planning with my team, and a chap called Mike, who's another Agile coach in our organisation, happened to come along and have some time free. He's quite new, so he had some time to himself, and he came along and he asked if he could just observe our backlog planning session, and from having him there, he asked a few perceptive questions that I simply wouldn't have thought to ask. We would have been fine, of course, if I hadn't have asked him, if he hadn't have asked them, we wouldn't have crashed and burned. But having him there, asking those extra questions, that extra level of perception, that stood back vision from outside the room, was so helpful in the moment and led us to a deeper understanding of what it was that we were working towards that we just wouldn't have had if he hadn't have been there. What else can we do? Well, we can use yes and. So this is a trick that comes from improvisation, improv theatre, and it's where you make the effort to, instead of responding to what somebody says with yes but or no, just straight up dismissing what they're saying and telling them all of the cataclysmic reasons that it's not going to work, you instead build on what people are saying with yes, yes, and also, or I really like what you've just said that's a great idea, and then we could. So this idea, or the practice is taking what they say, finding the bits that you agree with, finding the bits that you like, and building on those. You don't have to agree with everything they say. You can just pick out the elements that you really like if you disagree with some of it. But the idea is to constantly build on what you hear rather than to try and break it down. Okay, we also can decide to be more vulnerable. So this practice of vulnerability and admitting when we've made mistakes, and crucially asking for help to fix those, is another fantastic way that we can start to incorporate more of this idea of us, we, our. And what this again does, similarly with the curiosity that we spoke about earlier, it makes it okay for other people to model these behaviours themselves. We create the space where, because we are modelling the behaviour, other people can see what it looks like, other people can practice it, and it's safe to fail, safe to get it wrong. So if you forget and you accidentally dismiss somebody's idea instead of saying yes and, that's okay. You can admit that you did that when you realise, oh shoot, I'm so sorry, I meant to say this in response to your idea, and actually the things that I like are, and please can you help me pick that up next time. So asking for help to do better in these behaviours is a fantastic way of modelling this. Okay, what else does it look like? Well, one of my absolute favourites, and I've just given you an example a few minutes ago with my good friend Mike, pro-social behaviours. What I mean by this is, or a really good example of this, is positive gossip. So instead of the usual sniping behind people's backs and saying what dreadful things they've done, instead talk about people behind their backs, talk about them to other people on your team, but in a way where you're describing the really good things that they did, the ways that they helped you, the ways that they that you learned from them, the ways that you grew, the ways that you developed, how kind they were when you made a mistake. So these pro-social behaviours have a fantastic effect, because as people hear you talking about somebody else in a positive light, they get this lovely sense of you as a good person, the other person that you're talking about as somebody far more capable than they realised or thought. They might then have the capacity or choose to agree with you and expand on that. That gives them a good feeling. Ultimately, if that good word then gets back to the person that you were talking about, what a fantastic feeling that you're building for them. Oh, I must be doing a great job. I will definitely be doing more of those things that led to this positive gossip, to these, these really good things being said about me. I will absolutely do more of those things. So from this, we build, we enhance, we grow. As a team, we improve our capacity and our effectiveness and what we're able to move forwards and deliver. And I've mentioned it already, but another example of what that looks like is the bridge. Where do we overlap? So I can have my thoughts, you can have yours. Both of those are valid opinions, but in order to move the team forwards, in order to progress as a team, as a whole, we can just pick out, we don't have to agree with everything, we can just pick out the elements where we agree, and those are the things that we can move forward. What do we agree on, and how can we move that forwards? And all of this leads to us feeling far more like we are a real, genuine, forward-thinking, forward-moving, growing team. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind going to menti.com just before I change into the next slide, and then we will talk about our final section, which is purpose over direction. Now, we have completely ignored Simon Sinek's advice here. Sorry, Simon, if you're watching this, because of course he will. Because Simon Sinek advocates that we always start with why. Well, we're going to close with it. Sorry, Simon. What do we mean by starting with by looking at purpose over direction? Well, we mean that everybody doing the work understands why we're doing the work. How is this beneficial? How is this helping the company? How is this helping the team? How is this helping the department? How is this helping the customer, the client, the stakeholder? What is it that we're trying to achieve and why? Maybe not so much the how, and maybe not even the what, but certainly the why is an absolutely essential driver. And sometimes perhaps you might hear this referred to as vision. Kudos to anybody who gets that reference. So it means also pulling together, not pulling apart, pulling in the same direction, this is actually one of the outcomes we get people pulling together. When we focus on direction, because people don't necessarily understand the why, what you can end up with is people going off in different directions because they think that that's what is going to contribute to the thing that they've been told to deliver. Whereas when you understand what it is that you're building towards and why, it means that you can make far better cohesive decisions that help you all move in that same way. You can all begin to move towards the same thing. We end up with far more autonomy. We get self-directed individuals, self-directed teams who are far more motivated, far more empowered to move forwards because they understand what it is that they're working towards. They understand why they're working towards it, which means it's really easy to prioritize what it is that you choose to work on. And when somebody drops in with that last minute request or that, oh, this will only take 5 minutes or only take 2 minutes, so I'm just switching to the next Menti poll. It'll only take 2 minutes. Then you can respond with, well, that's not contributing to the vision that we as a team have. That's not contributing to our sprint goal. That's not contributing to our product goal. So, sure, but you'll have to park that for now, or we need to come back to that later if it's not contributing towards that. You also end up with people who are far more willing to be held accountable for their choices because they understand why, and we like to work with purpose. We like to work with direction. It means that we're a bit more willing to own up and take responsibility when we make a choice that doesn't support that, and we're far more willing to make better choices and move towards things that do support that. And so what this leads to is far more intrinsic motivation because the work that we do, when we understand why we're doing it, we get more fulfillment, and that then contributes to our well-being. I want to do good work. I definitely don't want to do pointless work. So that understanding why we're moving towards things, why we're going down that path, why we're choosing that particular thing, that helps us to feel like the work that we're doing has value, has meaning. There's a reason for me doing this. We crave meaning, and Dan Pink wrote a fabulous book, Drive, and it's also available as one of those fabulous original RSA hand-drawn videos. And I think this one's called The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. You can go and Google that. And it's not very long. It's a fantastic thing to show anybody who deals with thought work, because it talks very much about why we need that why we need that purpose, that reason to be going in a particular direction in order to feel motivated to go in that direction. And it essentially comes back to, we want to do work that has meaning and value, and we definitely don't want to be doing busy work or shell work or work that just makes it look like we're doing stuff without actually doing stuff. So, why not direction? Well, we clearly need to deliver value. Something is better than nothing, and it's the bottom line that means we all get paid, and it's the bottom line that feeds us all, right? But without purpose, we don't know if we are delivering the right thing. The trouble is that direction doesn't motivate us anywhere near as much as having a reason to go in that direction. We love to know why, not just what, where and when. And by giving people that information, by giving them that reason to do what they're doing, you treat your people with respect when you trust them to know why you want them to do things. So, what does it look like in the real world? Well, start with why. So beginning with leadership. Leadership needs to be clear about why we're all here, why we're all working on this, why we have chosen this particular direction, and also need to be clear about what good looks like, what we're working towards. That really helps. What else does it look like? Well, it looks like prioritizing our backlogs in order to meet that purpose of why. So when you have that end goal in mind, when you have that reason, it becomes much easier to actually pick the stories, pick the epics that support that outcome, support that task, and it becomes a much easier task for your product owners to actually kick out the items that don't fulfill that need. So you can focus on everything that lets you meet that goal, even if it's bugs and technical debt. So you ask yourself, well, does this story, does this request meet that purpose? And if not, chuck it out. Or if you really want to, you can save it for later, and then soon your Jira backlog could also become this. Okay, so purpose, it needs to be more than just sell stuff. You can ask why. A tool for doing this, really good thing to be doing this in your teams is using something like the 5 whys. And you can give alternate versions. You don't have to just sit there like a petulant 6-year-old asking why. I definitely don't have one of those. It's fine, sweetheart, I love you. But what we can offer up instead is alternative versions of the question why. So you can begin by asking why, by all means, but then you can follow that up with, well, so what does that let you do? And why is that important to you? Or what do you get out of that? And then you can go on to ask them, what is the benefit of that? And help them to really drill down on why it is that this is what they want to work towards. So ultimately, by valuing impact over intent, curiosity over authority, us, we, our over I, me, my, and purpose over direction, we've seen that we can underpin our work by helping our individuals have better interactions. We can take greater strides towards true agility. We can move from doing agile to being agile by focusing on the items on the left more. Thank you. And finally, if you would like to have any nerdy chats or to find out more, I am available in all of these places. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, Ceri. We really appreciate you being here, and I think I'm gonna have to watch the video a couple of times to absorb so much information, so much great information. So for the rest of you, I will be posting this recording on our YouTube channel either later today or tomorrow. But great session, Ceri. We really are thankful for you, and hopefully we can see you again around here at Scrum Masters of the Universe. And it looks like we're a little bit over time, so I'm just going to bid adieu, and I hope that the rest of you had a great rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are in this world. Have a happy day. Thanks, everyone.